Welcome to Attached, a platform for adding breadth and depth to everyday living. I'm Yakov Danishefsky, and this is the Shovavim series, a special release of tools and principles to help increase self-understanding and control for a life of elevated Kedusha. In the last couple of videos, I spoke a little bit about trying to gain more awareness, what's sometimes called mindfulness, in awareness of our thoughts, and to create a little bit more flexibility and awareness and spaciousness within the ways that we sometimes can get very narrow on our thoughts. The other piece that has to go along with this that's really, really important is to get out of our thoughts. So what I was just talking about is kind of within the world of still thinking about my thoughts, but trying to identify the thought as a thought, trying to create a little bit more distance between myself and the thought, and also trying to create more spaciousness around the thought. But the other piece that I want to add in this video is to get out of the thought. And what that means, and again, this can sound so simple, but it's not so easy to do in the moment, is to get out of the thought by trying to get more grounded in our body, or in our activities, in behaviors, and behaviors that are healthy and good for us. So let me start with the first piece of that. The first piece of that is getting more grounded in our body. So what can happen very often when we get very narrowly focused in these preoccupations, in these thoughts, is that we really actually, in a sense, become disconnected. We start to actually enter into a slight version of what's called dissociation. We really become almost as if there's a barrier at our neck between our head, our mind, and the rest of our body, or a part of our brain and then the other parts of our brain. So much so that we start to really only be thinking about this one thought. And so in a very simple way, what different grounding meditations, and I guess I'll give a little plug here, in a different one of the Attached series, we are releasing different guided meditations. And I think that those would be a really good place to start. There are many others. There's a lot of guided meditations on YouTube, on Spotify. There are different apps, Calm, Headspace. There's a lot of good places to do it. I hope that the ones that I've been releasing can potentially be helpful. But any meditation that will focus us on something other than these thoughts. So focusing us back on just noticing my breathing, noticing if I'm hungry, noticing my feet, noticing how I'm sitting. Any of these things which seem kind of so mundane are actually very, very helpful because of how mundane they are, because they get us out of the thought loop. What happens in preoccupation is that our mind just gets caught in this loop that goes around and around. I got a certain image in my head, a certain fantasy in my head, a certain sense that I need to do something in my head, and I just spin around that again and again without even having an awareness of the rest of my being. And so doing anything that connects me to a very simple presence of my body, looking around the room and noticing objects in the room. I've just exited the thought loop. Noticing the different colors in the room and counting them. Noticing 5 different sounds that I can hear. Noticing, again, my breath. Noticing my feet on the floor. Noticing the texture of different things around me. Any of these things, because of how mundane they are, and because they also activate a different part of the brain, it gets us out of that thought loop. So that's the first thing, is any of these very simple meditative grounding techniques that orient me to the here and now, and also activate the neocortex of the brain and get me out of that thought loop. The second thing is behaviors. Behaviors that are engaging, activities that are engaging. So going to exercise, calling a friend, calling somebody, trying to get together with someone, engaging in some behavior, some activity, whether it's with my kids, it's seeing if my wife wants to go, I wants to do something, if I have something I have to go do at work, but in a way that's not isolating and doesn't leave a lot of space for entering back into a rumination place in my mind. It's engaging in an activity that is absorbing, that absorbs me into it. So exercise is really typically one of the best examples of something like this. Getting together with other people is usually a good example of something to do. Things that engage and absorb my being into them. So again, just to review quickly, in addition to the starting point that we spoke about in the last couple of videos of being able to gain more awareness and mindfulness of the thought itself, once I do that, I now need to follow that up with something. And the things to follow that up with are, number one, gaining more awareness of the rest of myself. So becoming connected to the rest of my body and the surrounding area around me, using my five senses so that I exit the thought loop that I'm going around and around internally, and instead I use the five senses, my five senses, to exit that thought loop and get more present. And then following that up with a behavior that is engaging and absorbing of the self. Again, exercise oftentimes being the best, and other things that involve something that's social is usually something that can be very, very helpful. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please follow us on WhatsApp, YouTube, or Instagram. All our podcast series can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. I'd love to hear from you, so please reach out with questions, comments, or suggestions, or to be added to our WhatsApp groups. You can reach us through email using Yakov, YAKOV, .attached@gmail.com, or on WhatsApp at 773-888-2413.